Welcome to the Avants podcast. I'm Dan.
And I'm Nick.
How's it going, buddy?
Good. Two things. I have somewhat of a Carter Subaru question for you.
Okay.
And I have something I was watching that's kind of interesting as far as car storage goes.
Oh.
I don't know if it's new, but there is I think it's called SSR, and it's in Germany, and they are storing cars underground in a closed capsule that's full of nitrogen. It stops fires. It stops. You also can't go down there and steal it because you can't breathe.
It's a great theft deterrent.
I was watching. I'm going to send you the video, but it's kind of an interesting theory in the fact that it's all robotic. The car it takes the car down. It stores the car. It stops things from degenerating, like tires and things like that.
Yeah, I was going to say you won't lose any air pressure. Yeah. Huh.
Kind of an interesting theory, yeah.
I don't know if that would fly in the U.S. because somebody would sue.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Trying to steal a car.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
that's true. I like the idea of it being in Germany. That's really cool.
The Germans can get away with that. So here's a question.
Keep going.
I know. I heard it when I said it. Somebody was asking me. I had the garage open and a gentleman came by, and I had the bikes out because I started them up, and I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to let you answer it. Everybody gets on the internet and they watch this, and they watch people on the freeway and they get the speed wobbles.
Yes.
Okay. What's the best thing to do for a speed wobble? Is it to come off the throttle, come onto the brakes? What is the best thing to do?
On a motorcycle, come on the throttle, come off the throttle and ride the rear brake.
Okay.
To lighten up the front end.
And that's what I thought. I didn't say I didn't say the rear brake part. Yeah. I said definitely come off the throttle. But he was asking me, and I was like, "Oh, that's an interesting thing." And I think about
the best way to prevent it is with a steering stabilizer.
Yes.
Scott's steering stabilizer, great on a vehicle like a Jeep, which is known for the death wobble. A really good what do you call that? A steering stabilizer shock.
You're asking me?
You see the horizontal shock on our solid axle in the front?
Sorry.
Yeah, steering stabilizer.
Yeah, it's a steering stabilizer, I believe. Yeah.
It's like that. A good one of those will help. Okay. Getting your alignment actually correct will help even more.
We were talking more motorcycles, but I mean, it can happen in cars too, and SUVs.
Yeah, so, on a motorcycle, you just want to roll off the throttle and try and ride it out. A little bit of rear brake if you can, but it's a bad time.
It's called the death wobble for a reason. Unfortunately,
I've been there, and it's really freaky. It's usually like getting your suspension properly tuned. Like if you're on a motorcycle, you want to make sure your suspension is set up for you. Like in any kind of race car, but especially on a motorcycle.
Well, he asked me about the monkey, and I said that our typical thing. I was like, I'd just stand up, and let the mic go, and So okay,
that's interesting. Yeah.
I just thought that might be a kind of fun little Carter automotive tip as far as what to do.
Yeah, that is a really good tip. Okay. I'm gonna use that one for Carter, and I'm gonna save mine for next time. Then another one. So let's introduce our guest. But before we do. Did you know what special day it is?
Do you?
No.
Okay.
We do.
Yes,
I just said it wrong because it's actually it's women, girls.
The only reason I'm making you do it is because I forgot most of it.
Girls and women in sports day is what it is. It is what it is. And it's we've got a lot going on with women coming up with the Women's Motorsports Summit coming up.
Yeah.
Women in Motorsports. Dirtfish coming up next month. Some notable guests. Wish you were going to be here for that. Our guest today is Lyn St. James, who we've had on the show before, thanks to our friends at Park Place. But it's always good to catch up with Lyn. Such a name in the industry. I see you're wearing your Haggerty shirt. Is that a Haggerty?
It's cold here. I'm in Phoenix, and I am like so cold. So I got my Haggerty with my little Women in Motorsports North America pin. But yeah, it's my favorite vest. I love this vest.
Well, welcome to the show again.
Welcome. Well, it's good to see you again. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
I mean, we are seeing a lot.
I was just going to say, I've heard your dialogue, and I would like to kill whoever invented speed bumps. I just would like to kill them. That's
all.
Agreed. We agree.
We agree.
But I was going to say, as far as women in motorsports, I believe we had 9 women at Daytona this year, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Right? Were you down there for
Daytona? 24. There were 2 other women in the Mazda MX-5 Cup, and there was one in the Michelin Pilot Challenge. So it's finally, we got some numbers, and as I said, it's not just numbers, but we have really quality drivers. So I like that.
Yeah, exactly, because it's not just numbers. Motorsports is a little, let's say, not forgiving, because if you're not matching, if you're not competitive, you're not going to get a seat just because you're pretty or whatever. You got to be fast, you got to be a good driver, you got to know what you're doing. And this has been a really significant year for women in motorsports, especially though. I mean, with Sarah Price in Dakar for her second place finish, which was awesome. But I mean, we have a lot of up and coming women drivers that are actually putting down the numbers. which has always been a challenge in women in sports in general. Is they've got to be competitive across the field, and motorsports is really an area where firsthand women have been competitive for a long time. So let's rehash a little bit. I want to make sure the audience knows like the significance of your career. Where do we even start?
So I'm just going to tell you, this is not the significance of my career, but it's kind of waning on me right now. This is my 50th year in motorsports. I started racing 50 years ago in SCCA in a Ford Pinto in showroom stock. So I know it's not significant, but it's how it all started. And the very first road race or anything I had ever seen other than Indy was the 24 Hours of Daytona, which is why I go back every year, because that's where it all started. So it all starts somewhere, and I don't know whether racing found me or I found it, but it happened at the 24 Hours of Daytona. And I ultimately got to go back there, obviously, and race many times and win and all that. So I just want to lay that out, that it's been a long journey.
And you were the first woman to win Rookie of the Year, correct, at Indianapolis?
At the Indianapolis 500, yes.
Correct.
I was the second woman to race there, and the first to win Rookie of the Year. Yeah.
Yeah, no small feat to say the least. But I mean, you've raced. Let's cover SCCA is where you started. I mean, up through Indy, but I mean, drag racing. No, not drag. What was it? What was the other one? I'm getting confused. What was the other series you were competitive in?
Well, I mean, the decade of the 70s. I'll put it out for you. The decade of the 70s. I was an amateur racer in SCCA. Got to go to the runoffs. Didn't do well because the car blew an engine in qualifying, and then ultimately got to IMSA. And the decade of the 80s was sports car racing as a Ford factory driver, and I got to do IMSA racing, primarily SCCA Trans Am. I won the 24 Hours of Daytona a couple times. I won the 12 Hours of Sebring. I won at Watkins Glen. I won at Road America. I mean, I was, really embedded in sports car racing and in GTP, got to drive the Ford Probe. And, it was just an amazing, got to go to the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 89 and 91. So basically the decade of the 80s, the way I look at it, it was my sports car racing experience and achievements, and gave it all I got. And then I went to Talladega. I set records at Talladega in the Ford Probe, which is a prototype car. Then I went back in the stock car in the Ford Thunderbird. Didn't really have a lot of love for that. And then I thought, what's left? And the only thing left in my mind that I thought was still achievable, because even though I have great aspirations, I look at what's doable, what's possible. And I wanted to drive an Indy car. Didn't think I'd ever get to race an Indy car because I had only raced with fenders. And I had no open wheel experience. And so, but I bugged Dick Simon, the team owner, Dick Simon, who was just a great guy and has given more people opportunities than any other team owner. And he gave me the opportunity to drive an Indy car for the first time. And I did so well. He said, we can do this. He didn't say you can do this. He said, we can do this. And that was in 1988. And it took 4 years with a lot of reaching out to sponsors, a lot of no's. And in 1992, I actually got JCPenney as a sponsor and went to Dick and showed up at Indy for the month of May. And it was like Christmas every day, because I was at the racetrack, not as a spectator, because I used to go there a lot as a spectator. And, we qualified well, I think in 21st or something, and finished 11th and was honored with the Rookie of the Year award. So, and then I went on to run 7 Indy 500s, 15 IndyCar races overall. So the decade of the 90s was my open wheel peak opportunity to fulfill not just a dream, but to fulfill, I think, every potential fiber in my body that maybe said I could do this.
Well, and do this you did. You talked about the transition. You've never been behind open wheel before. What was the most challenging part of that? I mean, that's very different.
I mean, the Indy 500, just to give a perspective, was my first oval track race and the second time that I was ever in an open wheel car. I don't recommend it. I do not recommend it. But I had done Le Mans, I had done, Daytona, I'd done Talladega, so I'd done a lot of high speed stuff. But the hardest thing, I think, in the beginning was that I got totally mesmerized watching my front tires because I couldn't see my front tires when I had fenders, and I didn't know what the hell they were doing. I mean, I was turning the wheel and I was driving by feel. But all of a sudden, I still had the ability to drive by feel, but I had this visual, and I would get mesmerized watching my front tires, and I thought, stop it. You got to look way ahead, not at your freaking front tires. So adjusting to the visual changes, adjusting to obviously running an oval, it's a completely different discipline than it is running a road racing car. How you pass, how you attack the corner, how you find your apexes, everything is different on an oval. So it was a huge learning curve, but I loved every freaking moment of it.
What a rush too. I mean, it's a very viscerally different experience, to say the least. I think it would freak me out. It wouldn't freak me out to do it for fun, like to go take a track day and get in like a Formula 3 car and just like figure it out. But to get out there and go race competitively, like here, go be the best at this and actually podium, the pressure would just be insane. I don't think I could handle it.
I've never thought, I
I
don't even think about that.
Yep. No, that's exactly. I mean, you wear a race car, even if it's a freaking Ford GT or a Ford Mustang. I mean, it's a big suit when you put on, when you get into a sports car. But when you get into an open wheel car, an Indy car, I'm sure it's the same with Formula One. I mean, you slide into that car and you wear it. I mean, you feel everything that car is doing, and it's feeling everything. It does everything that you think about. I mean, you just think you're going to go ready to turn left, and the car seems to go left. I mean, it's so instantaneous. It's so responsive. It's so sensitive. It's so precise. And so you better get your shit together and have your head screwed on so that you are thinking precision. You're not hunting and pecking, and there's no, I learned in sports car racing, if the car's not right, you drive around it, you figure out how to adjust the car if you have adjustments, and then you just figure it out. In an Indy car, if the car's not right, you come into the pits. I mean, there's a gajillion adjustments. There's aero adjustments. There's suspension and technical mechanical adjustments they can make that are so finite. I mean, an eighth of an inch of just moving an air movement that you change the car on the front wing or the rear wing. And, I mean, this tiny adjustments at 220 plus miles an hour are going to make significant difference in the car. So you don't drive around stiff. That's how people crash, is because they think they're so good, they drive around it. And I think the blessing I had was that I was so green. I was like, shit, this isn't working. I'm going to come in and talk to the crew because, something's not right, as opposed to, oh, I can figure this out. I'll drive around it, And so the sensitivity and the mechanics of the car, the capabilities of the car are just extraordinary and wonderful. And so you just got to be connected to the car, and you got to understand when it's not right. Come in and tell them, and they'll figure it out. We'll figure it out together, but they'll figure it out.
Man,
you can tell it's not right. I filled my race suit, so you need to fix that. Yeah. So I'll be back. Yeah. That thing's broken. Sure. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I wouldn't even know where to start with something like that. It's so out of my ballpark. Like, I feel like I know cars pretty well, but when you put me in something open wheeled, I would just be like, I don't know.
So obviously it was a dream of yours always to do that. What did you do to train to come up to that moment? Like you said, that was the only second time you'd been in the car. Was it a different type of training than you did before with your racing career?
Not really. I mean, the physical training that I did, and then, there wasn't a lot available to us back then. There were not simulators. I make it sound like it wasn't ancient, but it was a number of years ago. And so we didn't have simulators. We didn't have a lot of resources. But I was lucky in the late 80s. Two professors from McGill University came down to Indianapolis, and they set up a whole testing program that was optional for the drivers to go through. It was called Dr. Dan DeRisi and Dr. Dan Marisi and Dr. Jacques Dallaire from McGill University. They had worked with Ayrton Senna and Nigel Mansell in Formula One, and had developed a protocol of testing, mental and physical testing that you could do against the basic data that they had developed from Nigel and Ayrton. And so and a lot of the Indy drivers went through it. I was the first female, and I was the first non-Indy driver or non-open wheel racer who went through their whole testing program in the late 80s in Indianapolis. And it made a huge difference in my understanding of myself and my understanding of where I was weak and where I had to work. So it really changed my whole testing and training and protocols of what I did, so, and luckily I did that in the late 80s. I think it was 88. And so that gave me time to start adjusting how I trained. So by the time I got to Indy in 92, I was a better driver. I was a better human. I was a better athlete. I was a better race car driver athlete. And so my visual work, that they had a whole programming that you could do on your computer to do anticipatory reaction time and reaction time. PitFit right now has all of that data, all of that stuff available to the drivers. I mean, Scott Dixon does it. I mean, Hinchcliffe does it. All of the guys do it now, and the gals. I mean, they've got a whole business now, but that didn't exist back then. And so, and a lot of it is mental. I mean, it's, you got to train your brain. I mean, your brain, you're like nothing more than a human computer. And so whatever input you get into your brain is what's going to happen automatically when you're going 220 or 30 miles an hour on the racetrack. So there's so many pieces of the puzzle that I was gifted and enabled to have access to that helped me at the time I needed it. I always wished I could have had that sooner, had everything sooner, and I'd been younger and I'd been better, and blah, blah, blah. But in reality, the safety of the cars, the performance of the cars, the access to information, the access to training and all that, it actually came to me at a time that helped me be ready when I made that big leap, because it was a leap to go from what I was doing to go to IndyCar. So it was, yeah. And those guys were they were always available to me. I mean, I could call them. They sent me little notes that they put in the garage it was magical.
That's really cutting edge research and technology. You really got into at an interesting time. That's really cool. Just the ability to process information at that speed blows my mind, because I've been in some pretty good high speed runs, and even at above 150, I think people who haven't gone that speed don't realize how fast things come at you. I mean, it's like your first time. I can't imagine going above 200. It's just like there's so much. 200, you're on a track in a controlled environment, but
200 is the threshold. Because I remember the first time I went over 200 was at Daytona. So, but that's, I don't know how to explain it, but it seems like, if you go from 150 to 160, yeah, there's kind of 160 to 170. Yeah, you got to get up on the wheel. You got to get your brain going a little faster. But somehow it's like when you go 200 and you go 201, you go 202, it's almost like going 10 miles an hour faster. So the exponential difference, I mean, I remember, I forget what year, I think it was 93 or 94. It was my second or third year that I was kind of stuck at 221 average speed, which means we were going like 230. And I knew the car
blows my mind.
I knew the car could go. The car was so freaking good. I thought, I know it's there, but I don't know where it is. And I don't want to hit the wall finding it. And I remember telling Dick, I said, Dick Simon, my team owner, I said, Dick, the car's so good. And I know I could go faster, but I don't know where. And I don't have enough experience. And I said, so would you put Raul? Raul Bozel was a teammate, and he'd been on the pole or on the front row. And, Raul was a very experienced driver. And so, Indy driver particularly. And so I said, would you put Raul in the car? So he puts Raul in the car, and Raul goes out, and I think he did like 222 average, and a mile an hour faster than me. But that mile an hour faster is an average speed all around is big. And he comes back in, and I'm like, so Raul, tell me, what did you do? Or how was it? And Raul gets out of the car and he goes, the car's good. That's all he gave me. I knew the freaking car was good. He goes, car's good. And I went out and I went a mile an hour faster than he did. And then he got pissed off, and that was the last help I got from him. But, so I don't know. For me, it was maybe a lack of confidence because I had a lack of experience, and that gave me the confidence to just do it. So, but the key is that a mile an hour average speed is hugely noticeable at those over 200 mile an hour range when you're in that category.
Yeah, and it's a noticeable difference in time, obviously, at that
Well,
speed.
yeah.
I think there's a fine line there between inexperience and confidence and getting it really, really wrong. Because if one inexperience goes a little too far on that scale, like that can be, that's a catastrophic ending to that scenario. So not a lot of forgiveness at 200 plus.
Yeah, there's no owie or ouch. It's
Well, actually, that's a good segue. If unless you guys,
no, you're good.
I was going to ask you, through the years of motorsports and all the races you've done, is there a moment that really that jumps out? He says, like, this is not good. Because not every crash is I'm sure there's plenty, but not every crash is this is, it's like, well, I'm crashing. This sucks because it's my position in the race. Your safety systems are there and you know how that handles. You've crashed. But is there any time you've been in the car and you're like, I don't know how this is going to end?
I've had
That's every day I get in a car.
Seattle driving.
That's every day. I don't know how this is going to end. Yeah.
I've had quite a few what I call mysteries in my crashes. If you go to YouTube and put my name in crashes, a number of them come up. But there's 3 that come to mind. And you learn more from failures. You learn more from those things than you do from successes, because you have so many more failures than you do successes. One was when I was running the Aston Martin Nimrod in Atlanta in the IMSA race. And man, I was in a groove. I was in the zone. And, it's an endurance race. And I was getting ready I knew we were close to it. We were going to make a pit stop and do a driver change. And I was I was in the zone. And all of a sudden, I lost the car and I crashed. And so we were out, obviously, and I just could not figure out what happened. What you have to do is you have to understand why and learn from something. Otherwise, it's useless. It becomes a useless disaster, a mistake or whatever.
It's a never waste of failure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a waste of failure. So I literally, for hours and hours and hours, just kept walking around. There was really no excuse. And I finally figured out what happened was the car continued to get lighter because I was burning fuel. I was using the same line. I was using the same apex. I was not adjusting. This was back in like 82. I was not adjusting to the change that the car was making. I was in almost a rote, this was every lap I was doing everything exactly the same, and I was in the zone, but I wasn't in touch with the car. So I learned. And so that one comes to mind. Obviously, 1986 at Riverside, I was like racing the Ford Probe. We had a yellow. I got in the car. I was the second driver. We go green, and I feel this bump, and next thing I know, I'm crashing into another car, and I'm a missile, and I'm on fire, and I'm upside down, and it's horrific. It's one of the ones that'll come up on YouTube, and I'm like, what happened? It was like obviously I found out. I got hit, and then it forced me into another car, and blah 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 blah. So shit happens, and that was a case of somebody screwed up, and it caused me. And then I guess the third one is probably my last big crash was in 2000 in Indy in qualifying. And I was in the zone, and warm-up lap was perfect, and the car was perfect. And I get the green, and I go into turn 1, and the next thing I know, the car is gone. I just lose the car completely. And I hit the outside wall, the inside wall, totally destroy the car. And I couldn't figure out what happened. And it wasn't until that hours later, when Derek Daly, who was doing TV commentating, said, "Lyn, come into the booth," and I got to watch the replay of it and found out that the tire separated from the wheel, which is why I totally lost the car.
Yeah, that's
because I was thinking it was me. I mean, the first thing is, what did I do? How did I screw up? And so, those are, I have others, but those are things that come to mind.
Yeah, it's we were talking on our last episode. We were talking about the Nürburgring and how Tom, yeah, I was talking about flow states, and you get into a flow state where everything just feels right, and you're feeling it. And that's something I've been chasing after driving my whole life, because you find it on motorcycles a lot easier than cars, but you get it now and then, and it's a great feeling. But there is nothing more jarring than an interruption in that flow state, when you feel like everything is aligning perfectly and everything's handling the way you want, and everything's driving, just everything goes the way you want. All of a sudden, it goes a little wrong, and it's just the unsettling feeling of it it almost makes you nauseous at the time, even when you don't crash. So having that, walking away from that and not knowing what's going on has got to be the worst. I'm glad you were able to come to the understanding and learn from all those.
Yeah,
that was your fault. It's rough.
Lyn, I want to change subject a little bit. Obviously, as we said before, National Girls and Women in Sports Day, you've been a huge advocate of women, not in all sports and in motorsports. When did you know that you wanted to take that on as your passion and really help women to get into this genre of sports and in general get into sports?
Thank you for asking that, because it was never on my radar. I mean, I was all about how the hell could I learn to be a better race car driver and win races. And then the year I was running SCCA in the Trans Am Series, I got invited to go to New York as a guest of Anheuser-Busch, who was sponsored the series back then. It was called the Budweiser Trans Am Series. And I got to go to New York and to this event that was put on by the Women's Sports Foundation, which I'd never heard of. And I got to meet these amazing women athletes that I'd watched on television, who I admired. I got to meet Billie Jean King and Donna DeVerona and so many others that were just like, oh my God, and it was the first time that I had been around women athletes. Particularly, they were not only the elite athletes and the Olympic athletes and the professional athletes, but I met like surfers and sailors and, just all kinds of different women athletes at this event. And of course they're like, "Well, what do you do?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm a race car driver." And of course they're like, "Well, what's that?" I mean, they were just, they didn't know. So I was kind of the odd duck out. But when I met Billie Jean King, and I found out about what the Women's Sports Foundation was doing, and how they were advocating. They were giving grants. They were advocating for women to have opportunities to play sports, and they were, of course, very involved with Title IX, which I went to a girls' school, and so I was pre-Title IX. But then I started to understand that because I went to a girls' school, I played sports from 7th to 12th grade. If I had gone to a public school at that time, because it was pre-Title IX, I would have never been given the opportunity to play sport. And if I didn't have that opportunity to play sports, even though I wasn't a great athlete, I absolutely am convinced that I would have never had the courage later to then try to pursue driving a race car. I mean, so it just it connected the dots. And then Billie Jean, who is the most amazing, powerful, influential human being you'll ever want to meet in this planet. And I mean, she just absolutely, it's not about you, it's about how you can impact others. And so, she's like, "You are the most powerful while you're competing. You get out there and you make a difference." I'm like, holy shit. I mean, it was like I had all of a sudden this responsibility that it wasn't just about me. And so it took a while before I kind of found my way, and I volunteered for the organization, and then ultimately got on their board, and then ultimately I became the president of, and so, that was the whole turning point for me, was to understand as an athlete, even though I had very critical, hard goals and all of that for myself, that it was much bigger than just about me. And so that has guided me from the time that when I got to Indy and I got so much fan mail and I realized I needed to do something, and I created a driver development program, and people like Danica Patrick and Sarah Fisher and Melanie Troxel and Aaron Crocker, came to my driver development program, and I did everything I could to help them. And then, of course, fast forward to now, I co-founded with Beth Peretta Women in Motorsports North America, because now timing it's all about timing in this world, about anything, whether it's technology or podcasts or whatever. If it doesn't exist or it's not the right time, you're not going to be able to get traction. And when we created Women in Motorsports North America, it was during the pandemic, and we created these Zoom calls, and we got these people that had a common interest and a common passion to want to make a difference. And the next thing you know, we created a not-for-profit called Women in Motorsports North America. We're not even 2 years old yet. And we've got, events happening. We've got our Women in Motorsports, Women with Drive Summit, where we're doing that every year annually. And we'll just did the third one in Phoenix last November. We move it around. We had over 450 men and women, and this is about men and women helping the sport grow, helping the sport, not just invite more women, but to celebrate the women and elevate the women. And that's how the sport's going to grow. I mean, if the guys just keep talking to themselves, the sport is going to die, because you're all going to die, and you got new kids that will come in, but it'll never grow. So we just really want to empower women and invite women and just help grow the sport and help make a difference. And the industry is now saying, we want this. We understand that this is a value that'll help our sport grow and help us be better. And so whether it's in engineering, whether it's in marketing, whether it's in management, whether it's in hospitality, whether it, race car drivers, crew members, it's all across the board. It's happening. And now there's just a lot of momentum and a lot of energy, and a lot of people are coming to us and asking us, how can we help? And that's exactly what has to happen. So it's pretty exciting right now.
Lyn, you meet so many people. The first time you and I met was down in Arizona, and I interviewed you, and we talked about craftsmen coming into the industry, that was the younger generation not really getting into that and being able to use an English wheel and work on old cars and work on cars, and the importance of that. And not only women doing that, but men and everybody. And it was like I said, I've ever since that meeting, it's always been a passion of mine when I talk to younger people to talk to them about this, and the fact that everybody wants to go be a doctor and things like that, but it's really cool to go work on cars or learn how to build things. And so I really appreciate you for kind of inspiring me to be out there and talk to people. And I thank you for that. So,
good. Well, yeah. That was when I was an ambassador for the RPM Foundation. And so,
yes,
restoration, preservation, and mentorship. Which I still support them. But there's like, I don't want to call it niches, but it's like niches. There's so many different disciplines. And if people don't know, guidance counselors at schools don't talk about this stuff, and so somebody we have to, and I believe we have that responsibility. If you have a career in this industry, let people know about it, and particularly young people who are kind of looking for what the heck they want to do.
Well, and it's a very good industry to be in right now, to say the least. Do you know what the average dealer charges around here per hour now? What the actual going rate is?
$60, $70 an hour, probably.
Oh man, are you out of touch? Because I was too.
Okay.
Yeah. Did you know it's over $200 an hour right now for dealership labor? So if you're looking to be, it's a tough living. I'm not going to sugarcoat anybody. If you want to be a tech out there, you're going to work hard for it. Male, female, doesn't matter. You're not going to get a lot of breaks. You got to be good at your job, and you got to deliver. But it's an awesome, respectable career that can net you a lot of money. You're not just going to be. I just want to get people out there to know, you're not. It's not the old days. It's not the 50s. The cars are a lot more complicated. Your part, which was still harder in my opinion, because I've worked on carburetors. But your part computer tech. Even now they're doing so much more than they've ever done. That it's such a high skill career that it's really respectable and amazing to watch people who can do that for a living. I'm just like, it's impressive.
You can get into the automotive industry in your older years. Carl did it. He retired and then became
exactly.
Anyway, Carl is the reason Lyn is here this week, and so huge shout out to Carl. But
he's hiding on the
call.
He's hiding
on the call. But yes.
I wanted to ask you, people that are coming to you now, the younger people that are coming to you now, what do you see them most excited about in their automotive career?
I have to admit, I think it's in the engineering, because in the engineering discipline on any team in any whether it's IndyCar or NASCAR, or I mean, even in NASCAR, is that they have really expanded the engineering and the technology. I mean, I hope we don't, I hope we don't go over the top and come back down and get all messed up. But I think that there are certainly engineering opportunities available in all of forms of motorsports. I mean, even data acquisition or data, acquiring data and analyzing data, converting how you buy a ticket, converting, so whether you're working for the racetrack or working for a race team, I mean, so I think technology, I don't want to call it, maybe it isn't engineering, it's technology. So I think the technology space in motorsports has the biggest growth potential. And I still believe racing is a microcosm of life, because it shows how men and women can work together and compete against each other in a very intense, you can bullshit in a business, you can delay things, you're hiding. In a business, you can hide. In motorsports, you can't hide. If you screw up, everybody in the stands are looking at and judgmental about what you should have done, as a race team. And so it's a very intense and competitive, and you're very exposed. And so, and it really rewards the best. You can't be mediocre and be successful in our sport. But I think technology is the biggest growth potential. Sustainability, trying to figure out how could we continue to push the envelope and be competitive and all that, but not abuse, our resources. And so, I mean, I think sustainability, but that's technology, that's just all of the technology kind of aspects of the sport. So I think that's where the biggest growth is. And that's who the kids are. The kids are coming from, from an educational experience where technology is what they're studying and what they're interested in.
That's interesting. I have a coworker who's down at King of the Hammers right now. He's a he works in data science for us, which is a very, very hard job. One of the hardest jobs in engineering and tech is being a data scientist, because it's
and that's the King of the Hammers, where they're driving over rocks and doing all different kinds of stuff.
Right. And so, like, he's using data to help design and reinforce the Jeep that he's running down there. It's a serious thing for them to look at, stress and failure limits, because they're like, we want to reduce weight as much as possible, but we're racing the hardest, like, physically abusive race.
To be strong, yeah.
Yeah, and so he's like, where do we, let's 3D print some suspension components. And if you've, speaking of which, have you seen, little segue, have you seen any of the coverage of King of the Hammers from Can-Am specifically on their, you saw how they did the new front suspension on the Maverick that wraps over the front of the tires? They've released some footage from them racing down there that will blow your mind. It's those things going sideways off 40-foot drops, hitting the side of the tire, hitting the suspension, and then just keep going like nothing's going on. And everybody looked at that when it first came out, and they thought, there's no way that's going to work. They're going to hit that thing on the rocks. That suspension's going to explode. And those things, talk about putting your money where your mouth is. I have never been more impressed with a manufacturer showing off and kind of like showing the haters what's up than seeing what Can-Am did with that front suspension on that side by side. It is amazing to watch technology work.
I didn't even know about the King of the Hammers until I met Jesse Combs.
Oh yeah. Oh, we all miss Jessie.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. I know. She was very special.
I've always said I'm now begin to work on some of these cars. I mean, you look at, we have a good friend that works in the automotive industry, and he was talking about the fact that one of their big, large sedans, that if you could total it out in a hailstorm, because there's so much technology in the roof that it would take so much, it's amazing to me. But I also like the idea of the old school, and we're children of the 70s and things like that, where you could pop a hood, climb under the hood, work on the carburetor in the rain, and you knew what was under there. It was simple. The gas came in one way, the exhaust went out another way. So there's something about the simplicity.
I saw some beautiful engines and beautiful, just simple but beautiful engines this last Sunday in Miami at the Motor Car Cavalcade, where they, it's a pretty wide open, bizarre kind of, their categories are very wide open. But I mean, there was a kid that built a Nissan engine that the thing was gorgeous, but you could understand everything about it. It was a Nissan from like the 70s. I think it was a Z car. And there was there was a Shelby Cobra. I mean, there was a guy that did a Viper that was just unfreaking real. I mean, he had nitrous in the back and all that stuff, but it's just, you could understand it when you look under the hood. And we were actually judging engines. You could look under the hood and see it and understand it. You know, a couple of Ferraris there where you couldn't even see it. I mean, it was just all
like that's what a Viper needs is more nitrous, because the Vipers were safe before, but put nitrous on it. Great idea.
Yeah.
Why not?
It was bizarre. Yeah.
No, I get it. I mean, I love bizarre. So
well, pre-OBD tuning, it was pretty much just if you add more boost, you add more fuel, and then when it starts flaming out, you just start reducing the fuel. You bring it back. It was actually oddly low tech compared to what we have now, where it's like, I mean, I was looking, so Gaurav, I'm not going to spoil this from yet, got a new vehicle, and it has a twin turbo V8 under the hood. And with a tune, off the shelf tune, you can gain another 100 horsepower and 130 foot-pounds of torque, still meet emissions, and still keep it under warranty.
Wow. You a father now?
Yeah. Oh, it's his family. It's his family. It's a family car.
Yeah.
That's going to do 0 to 60 in sub 4 seconds. So congratulations to him. By the way.
Yeah. Lyn, are you a person that likes to work on your cars? Do you enjoy that?
No.
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 I think I'm fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to drive them. I mean, I learned. I remember when I had my Pinto, my very first race car, and it was my street car, and my husband said, "Okay, you're going to take the engine apart and put it back together again." And then I did. And so that I learned to wear the pistons and just how the engines all worked. And of course I said, but there's these parts. I still have this box of parts left. He said, don't worry about it.
Fine. You didn't need those.
It's weight.
It's weight savings. Yeah, it's weight savings. You don't need those. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was not, I like to understand it, but I don't have the aptitude to actually, work on it. They wouldn't even, when I got to racing, they wouldn't even let me put the decals on the car because I never got them straight. So
I suffer from that. Nick is the creative side in our friendship. And I can't, anything for me, it's like, it's not symmetrical. It's not, perfectly even and looks this way. Like that's me. Nick is like, no, do it this way so it actually looks good.
You want to know the bane of my existence as far as stickers is putting tabs on a license plate and getting them straight, because I have to stare at them for a year if they're crooked. So yeah, I just went through that stress, like 15 minutes in my garage going, no. Like I had blue tape on my license plate. So yes, I get that. Yeah.
But what I was able to do, which I really was pretty proud of actually, is that I was able to understand the systems of how the race car works, how the car works. And sometimes I could predict or not predict, but I could describe well enough that I could, whether it was electrical or if it was fuel, if the thing was missing. I mean, I had a great ear. I remember going to Indy with my buddies from the gas station. And I said, the cars are going so fast, I can't tell who's in what. I mean, this was back a long time ago. And they said, listen to the engine, listen to the resonance of the engines, and you'll tell whether it's an Offie or whether it was a Ford. And so I developed an ear, and I developed understanding sometimes the smells and the sounds, and to be able to predict or describe to the real text, what was going on. And I have a good visual. I'm a very visual person. So I literally would visual the systems. I would visualize how the engine was running, how the brakes, everything. I would visualize everything. And so I got a good sense of it, but I'm not one that could work on it for sure.
Yes, but like you said, any good race car driver or bad race car driver may not be able to work on their machine, but they can tell you what's wrong with it while they're driving it. And the fact of, which is important.
Or at least we've heard from other people in this podcast, they can tell you what they're feeling, and then they have a good relationship with their crew who can tell them why it's happening. And that's really important too.
Yeah. No,
you can always make up a sound. It's going cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. Oh, we know what that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's life like for you now? You've been 50 years you've been racing. I know all the work you talked about before, but like, what's your driving life now? What's life like for Lyn St. James now?
Well, because of Women in Motorsports North America, I'm working hard. I mean, it's literally a full-time job, even though I'm not getting paid as a full-time job. I was a volunteer, but and I'm trying to stay current. So I go to races. I try to make sure I go to a drag race, to a stock car race, to an Indy car race, to a sports car race. Even go-kart race and quarter midgets. And, I try to hit every form of motorsports once a year to stay current, because I can't give advice based on what I did or what happened 10 years ago, 5 years ago. And it changes fast. So I go to a lot of events, these kind of concours and which was not my thing a few years ago, but until a few years ago when I got invited to be like a VIP judge. And so I did pay attention. So I do know a fair about cars, and I love to learn. So, I mean, when I go to it and I judge at these concours, I'm usually with a really experienced judge. Some of them are designers and engineers from the OEMs, or they're guys that have been doing this for years. And so I've learned that I can learn quickly and contribute to the group, to the team. And I love cars, so I love going to these car shows. And then I make speaking appearances, and I'm busy on the road, and I'm busy learning, and I'm busy staying current and staying relevant. And sometimes I get honored, like at Amelia Island a few years ago, as the honoree, which was a huge deal. So I get gifts sometimes like that are cool.
We always talk to our guests about the current automotive industry. Are you seeing anything out there, cars, technology that you really like?
No, I mean, I'm very confused, and I think so is the industry. I mean, I get automotive news every week. I mean, I stay very current with what's happening in the industry. And I can tell that, I mean, they're flailing right now trying to figure out, what to do. And how to market it. And I think it's a very disruptive time right now in the industry. It's not just as far as electric versus, I don't know. I mean, I've always, I learned because the decade I was with Ford, decade of the 80s, when I had Ford as a sponsor, I was really also given the gift of being able to go to the factories and and work with the designers and engineers and test drive the cars. And so I really learned, I mean, the more I learned, the more amazed a car ever gets built, because of all the processes it has to go through and the approvals and yada, yada. And so, I see what right now the industry is just at a very disruptive state. And so I'm impressed with the responsive power of an electric vehicle, but I'm still thinking of a usability. I'm a very practical person when it comes to driving a car in the street, and I want to have access to fuel I want my car to always be able to go. I don't want to ever feel vulnerable, and I don't. And I think to be able to organize your life around the kind of things that you have to organize your life around if you have these alternative sources of power. And every car I ever get in, I don't care how much it costs, I find very quickly things that make no sense to me, that I just go, who the hell put that there? Why did they design that? I mean, which is why the engineers liked actually when I test drove cars, because I would pick out things. I mean, the seat design, oftentimes the car suspension was actually not that bad, but it felt like shit because of the seats, and so, oops. Sorry.
No, that was awesome.
That was awesome.
I don't care what it was. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's a great ringtone.
That's a great ringtone.
We approve.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I'm not terribly excited about, the production vehicles in today's market right now. I think they're struggling, and I see there's a lot of variety of stuff out there, but if I was a consumer that literally was trying to go out there and buy a car, and I will be, I am a consumer that in another 6 months, I'm going to have to figure out what kind of car to get. And I'm like, I have no idea.
That new Dark Horse Mustang is just saying that thing is quite the feat. If you want to reward your friends at Ford, they've done a very nice job with that thing, to say the least.
Yeah. Finally.
I mean, and automotive automakers are now pulling back from electricity. Like I saw BMW is starting to pull back. They're going to start to try to go towards hybrid, or not hybrid, but hydrogen.
Hydrogen. Yeah. I mean, now they're all exploring that, and
yeah. I thought we tried that.
Yeah.
Well, electrical's heavy.
Yeah.
It's not slow, but it's exceptionally heavy. It's expensive
great
to
on the environment, though.
Yeah, it's not that great for the environment. There's worse things, don't get me wrong, but it's people don't want it. Yeah. If it wasn't for mandates, we wouldn't even be buying it.
That's just,
there's all this money and tools.
Exactly. How the mandates come in the government. I mean, in 1981, one of the first things I did for Ford Motor Company was drive a Ford Escort from California LA to New York across country on methanol fuel because it was American Energy Week. And it was when they were coming out with all, because it was right after the 70s when, we had all the fuel crises. And I mean, so there was struggles going on back then, in the 80s, tried to figure it out.
Looking at it from my project management hat and a cost perspective, I think the logical move is for them to go, the companies that have invested too heavily in electric and are not selling, they need to go hybrid because then they don't have to eliminate all their tooling or create all new tooling. It'll save them a ton of money to go hybrid.
I do not understand why that. There's a certain, when you're making a big change, that usually there's a transition, you get to the change. Hybrid was around and it was like they just bailed and walked away from it and went straight to electric instead of doing the hybrid thing. My logic.
I'm glad to see Toyota made that stand. Yeah, Toyota really did a great job because looking at their new SUVs, the new Lexus GX just came out. It looks great, by the way. But by putting the hybrid drive system on the transfer case or in the center instead of at the wheels, one, they get a much more effective hybrid system with a ton of torque, but it doesn't add nearly as much weight. And it's you can get a really effective hybrid. As long as you can't
crush it off road.
Well, it's in the most protected place possible, which is like so that you can it's a very difficult sell to get guys that are typically off-roading Tacomas and 4Runners to go into something like that because of the weight. So they're like, how do we do this as minimally as possible and actually put something out people want? And they actually did a pretty good job of it. I got to give them credit. I'm impressed.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Carl had to go, so he apologized. He said, "Got to drop. Thanks, Lyn. Hope to get back to you later soon."
So I'm sorry he stalked you wherever he found you, Lyn. We're glad to have you on, but he was so excited. I told him I need a guest. He's like, "I'm going to call Lyn." And I'm like, "Excellent idea. We love Lyn."
We ran into each other at Daytona at the 24 hours, so that's
good. Yes. That's somebody told me they gave him an over-the-wall pit pass. I think that's a mistake, but
he just wanted to look special.
So yeah,
where will you be next on your constant life on the road and touring?
Well, I've got a couple of meetings out of in Charlotte and in Daytona Beach in this month, but my next event will be at Amelia Island the first weekend in March. Yeah, I mean, so I've gone to that many years, and then as I said, I was honored 3 years ago, and that was really, really special. So that's where I'll go. And then I hoped maybe get to go to St. Pete to the IndyCar race. I don't think I'm going to make Sebring. I don't know. And, just trying to figure out March. There's a lot of stuff that starts happening. And then hopefully be at Long Beach. I always try to, the 24 Hours of Daytona and Long Beach were kind of my two anchors of making sure I always do those two events.
Sure. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk to us. It's always wonderful to see you and kind of catch up with you and see what the wonderful things you're doing for women in motorsports and motorsports in general.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's good to talk to you guys again. And I'm glad that we were able to celebrate National Girls and Women in Sports Day, even though this is going to air later. But March is Women's History Month. So everybody needs to kind of remember that. And I think March 8th is International Women's Day. And so, there's a lot happening in the world and we like to celebrate. Celebrating is good.
Yep.
It lets people.
March 2nd is. Yeah, March 2nd is the Women in Motorsports Summit at Dirtfish. Yep. And as usual, Josie Rimmer has knocked it out of the park with her guest list. You should be joining us for that, by the way. Just saying, what a perfect spot for you to be.
Well, hopefully in the future.
So I hope you do.
She's got Michelle Mouton, and it doesn't get much better than that for particularly rally type driving. So
that's Dan's dream woman. There's nothing about Michelle. He got to talk to Michelle last year, and I've never seen him that goofy.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I was in love with Michelle before I knew what being in love with a girl was. So I just remember watching her race Pike Peak when I was a little kid, and I'm like going, "Wow,
I know.
I want to be
like her."
Yeah,
she's one of my heroes, but she's tough. She's tough.
Yes.
Yeah, you're both badasses in my books.
We agree. We agree. Well, again, Lyn, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
All right, great. Thanks, guys.
Yes.
For this episode of the Avants Podcast, as always, I'm Nick.
I'm Dan, and don't just get there. Enjoy the drive.
So, Lyn.